Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Building Diaries. Today I am finally filming a video that I've been planning on doing for ages, but I just needed to build up the courage to kind of officially crunch all of my numbers. We're going to be talking about every cost that I've had to pay up until the point of breaking ground on my new build. Construction should be starting literally any day now. I'm actually so freaking excited, I can't even tell you, but I have had to pay for a lot of things up until this point, including a few things that honestly I had never even heard about or considered. I have all of my notes here, so if you see me looking anywhere, that's what I'm looking at, just to make sure I tell you exactly what all of the prices were. I've broken this down into kind of two different sections. The first is all of the standardized costs for the appointments. I know that I've covered some of these previously, but I thought it might be helpful to have it all holistically in one place. I've also broken it down in terms of the timeline of when I made each of the payments to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. And then the second group of costs are additional things that maybe are not related to the build itself specifically, but contribute to getting to the point of construction starting. I've tried to arrange it in a way that makes sense in my brain. I'm going to put a little tally somewhere on the screen as well, so you can kind of see the total cost as it goes up. Now, despite everything that I just said, the very first cost that I have included technically did not contribute to this build, but it was a part of my journey to get here, and it's something that I think is important that people factor in, and that is the cost of reviewing contracts. For me, this was the cost of reviewing an established property contract that I was looking at purchasing before deciding to build, but for other people it might be the cost of reviewing the land purchase contract as well. For me, this cost was $165. It does feel like a bit of a sunken cost to me because obviously I didn't purchase the house and I ended up deciding to build, so I did a complete 180, but I would never ever want somebody to make a purchase without reviewing a contract, and so I guess ultimately I do count it as money well spent. Next cost I had to pay was my building deposit, or my holding deposit. Now this was a non-refundable amount for me, so I made it at a point in time where I had had my initial conversations, I'd spoken to my new home sales consultant, I'd gotten an outline of pricing, all those sorts of things, and I was confident that this was the builder I wanted to move forward with. I assume that this price and these terms are going to vary builder to builder. For me it was $2,500, and as I said, that was non-refundable. So if I had gotten further down the track and decided that I wanted to pull the plug, they would have kept that money. In the overall scheme of the cost to build a house, $2,500 might not seem like a lot, but it is ultimately a lot of money. So you want to make sure that you are feeling very, very confident in any decisions that you make kind of from this point going forward. After that deposit had been paid, there was a bit of back and forth with my new home sales consultant. She put together my PwC, or my initial contract, and within that contract I had a lot of additional costs factored in. I would assume more than the average person, because I spoke to my consultant about a number of the things that I already knew that I wanted that could be added on at later stages, but because I knew I wanted them, she could cost it into the initial breakdown, which I found to be really helpful for visibility. It's not a necessity, but as someone who likes to have as much information as possible, particularly when it comes to budget, I really liked that she did it that way. That was things like heating and cooling, raising the height of the ceilings, the windows, the doors, a couple of other things. I think I expanded the benches. I've actually been thinking about doing a full breakdown of all of the upgrades that I made, maybe like the costs associated, but I don't know if that is too much information for anybody except me. Let me know what you think. But because of all of those things being factored in, my initial PwC price was higher than I am guessing the average person's, and so my balance of deposit was also higher. After that initial $2,500 got taken off the top, for me that looked like $15,966. I didn't have to physically pay my conveyancing fees until a little bit later on, but I had already been organizing them up until this point. This is the one cost that I have that is for both land and build. I'm not really covering off on land costs in this video because I just think the cost of your land and the costs associated with that are going to vary so much based on where you are buying, so it's probably not the most helpful for me to touch on, but I do have my conveyancing for the both of them just as a single fee. That was $1,580, and I believe some of this was due on the balance on the date of settlement for the land, and the second part of it was due, I don't know if it's due at the end or if I've already paid it. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I would have to go back and look. After all of that was paid, I got an email from a random company. I actually had to check with my builder if it was legitimate, and that was for something that was called title insurance. I did actually have to Google it because I didn't know what it was for, and Google said it's a one-time non-expiring policy that protects property buyers and homeowners against financial losses from legal ownership or boundary issues such as undisclosed illegal building works, council breaches, or fraud. It is not mandatory to have like within Australia, but it was mandatory through my builder specifically. Looking at that list of things though, honestly, I do think the insurance is probably money well spent. That is often my opinion of insurance, like broadly. It was also a once-off fee. So I pay it and I have lifetime coverage, which is really lovely. And the fee was relatively nominal. It was $435.67. If we were to start construction and then discover that the boundary lines were incorrect and we needed to move them or, you know, do anything like that, I think having that protection in place would be probably invaluable. And then most recently I had to pay another fee that I had not considered at all, and that was for clearing the land. Before the builder comes in, you need to remove any debris, grass, weeds, pretty much anything that is on the block that would interfere with them getting in and getting ready to pour the slab. This was extra annoying because at the time that I purchased my land from the developer, I actually had a clause in my agreement that said that they would clear it prior to settlement, which they did. But in the time between settlement and now construction starting, it's been probably 5 or 6 months. It's been a very long time. And because I'm building in an area where there's lots of construction happening, there is also a lot of dumping happening, which is super frustrating. So there's just like random bags of rubbish. There's been concrete. The weeds have also grown up quite a lot, but the heavier building materials and stuff are not things that I could move myself. I've had friends in the past clear their own blocks. They've gone out and they've spent a whole day like pulling up the weeds and doing the mowing. But because of some of the things being like very heavy, also not knowing how I would dispose of them, I'm assuming I'd have to hire like a skip bin or something like that. It felt a lot easier and honestly kind of necessary for me to bring somebody else in to do that. A local company quoted me $1,600 to do it. My builder quoted me $1,100, and then I ended up finding somebody on Airtasker who did it for $900. So I would definitely recommend shopping around. Again, a really annoying fee to have to pay, but for me at least, there wasn't a lot of way to get around that. All right, that's everything that was build adjacent. I do, like I said, want to take you through the final build costs themselves because I have had a lot of changes and updates throughout the process. So that initial preliminary works contract, the PwC that I was talking about before that was done with my new homes consultant, that initial costing was $373,909. Now, we all know from previous videos that I then went to my color appointment and my electrical appointment and absolutely blew the budget out of the water. If you want more details on that, I've done a video for each of those appointments where I kind of covered off on what was built into my PwC and then what additional funds I spent. But to summarize it, at the color appointment, I spent an extra $35,379. And then at the electrical appointment, I spent an extra $5,191. You think I'd be done there? I went to the appointments, I made all my selections, I spent a lot of money, we're at the end. You would be wrong. I have had, I think, 7 contract variations since the initial PwC was done. 2 of those would be for each appointment, but I've had a number of additional ones that I kind of wanted to run you through because I don't actually know if this is normal or not, but it is something that I think is worth preparing for. The first one is actually very positive. My first variation was a credit because there were a number of standardized reports and checks and things like that that were accounted for in the PwC. I'm assuming they're put in there for everyone just as part of their standardized offering, but they weren't needed for my particular block. So I actually got a credit back of $1,650, which was lovely. But I then have had 2 additional rounds of variations, which were due to the girl who did my color appointment not accounting for things that should have been accounted for. And I wanted to use this as a reminder to double, triple, quadruple check all of your documentation as it comes through. I know that it seems like it is in a foreign language, but I feel like I did a very thorough job of checking mine and there were still things that slipped through the cracks and only got picked up later on at a different point in time. Kind of wish it had been caught earlier just so I knew the total costing, but it is what it is. The first variation was for the door height, and I honestly don't know how this happened because this was something that I do believe was in my original PwC. We adjusted the heights of all of the doors, all of the windows, everything was raised because we raised the ceiling heights to 2.7. Logically, you would think that this would include the front door as well, but apparently that line item was not covered. The cost to make that change was around $500. It actually did kind of work in my favor that she came back to double check this because I then asked her a question about the backsplash tile. If you recall, I wanted to change my backsplash tiles to ones that I was going to do. Originally, we'd just put in like a standardized like category 1 option. I asked her if it would be possible to forgo those entirely, and because there's no sink there, she actually said it was possible, which was amazing. So I got like a $200 credit for that. After the credit back, the total difference that I then needed to account for was $340 for the door. And then I had an additional cost, which was 4 changes we had made that from my understanding, they are in the contract. They had been covered off on, and I believe what has happened is she just has not adjusted the costing to reflect the changes that were made. So that included a change in finish to the cabinetry in my kitchen and also some feature tiles that have been added into our secondary bathroom, which They were a line item. I remember reviewing it and seeing them there, but I'm assuming that the change in cost had just not been accounted for. I also got clarification around the mirrors and whether or not they tile behind them, because I was planning on changing the mirrors out. Turns out they don't, which is something that is worth checking with your builder if you're planning on doing the same thing. Thankfully, I asked at this stage. So ultimately she just took the mirrors out knowing that I would replace them and did account for the extra tiling to cover the space where the mirrors would have been, which of course was another additional cost. So all three of those variations came to a total of $1,166, and I hope to God I never have to sign another variation contract ever again because I am sick of them. Hello, it is future editing Jess, just coming in here to let you know that today, the day that I am editing this video, I got a land tax bill, $1,455, literally kill me. So I'm gonna add that to the total on the screen because I didn't have it when I filmed this video. So grand total for all of the building costs for the house itself and all of the pre and additional and extra things that I had to do was $418,870.67, which is a gobsmacking amount of money when you consider that this is a single story house in the suburbs. It's really interesting talking to friends that built a couple of years outside of COVID. I know that there were a lot of extra grants available at the time that made that a little bit more affordable, but the cost of building materials has gone up so significantly in the past couple of years. With everything going on in the world, I'm honestly feeling really thankful because I'm imagining, you know, the petrol and the availability or lack thereof of oil and things like that are going to mean that it's more expensive for freight, which means it's going to be more expensive again for materials. My building costs are locked in, thank God. But if you are someone who's looking at building, I definitely would be checking into whether your contracts are fixed cost or variable. I don't know how much control over that you will have, but it might be something that is the difference between you choosing to go with one builder and another. And again, typically just not something I would have considered. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Like I said, costs are going to vary so much dependent on the builder, dependent on when you're building, depending on where you're building. There are like so many things that factor in. But for me, like I keep saying, I'm just often taken aback by the things that I didn't know. And so hopefully this video has kind of brought a few more things to the front of your mind that you know to consider and factor in, so you're not taken surprised by them like I was. I will link in the description bar the videos that I did after my color and electrical appointments, because I know I go a bit more in depth into the costs in those videos, and I also reference a bunch of other things. So if you haven't seen them, they're definitely worth looking at. But I'm excited to say I made it through pre-construction. It's done. Construction is going to start any day now. I am really excited, and I'd love to know what kind of updates you want as the build process goes on. I have now got many months of the building to get through, which is kind of crazy to think about. I am also obviously shopping for like interiors and things that I want to add on to like the inside of the house. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're not, definitely follow me on Instagram and TikTok because I post regular short little in the moment updates on both of those platforms. If you haven't already subscribed, it would really mean the world to me. I'm really enjoying documenting this process and I'm glad to have you guys along for the journey. So thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye.